Hello, and welcome to our case study discussion today, aimed at helping Impact 100 Garden State applicants present a successful grant application. My name is Pamela Haviland, and I'm a member of Impact 100, which is a nonprofit, all-women's, all-volunteer group that awards $100,000 grants to nonprofits serving the counties of Morris, Passaic, Somerset, Sussex, and Union counties. In 2024, we were able to award 4 $100,000 grants. Joining me today is Heather Thompson, the Executive Director of Table to Table, an organization that was awarded a grant in 2018 and in 2024. Heather also won with NorwesCap in 2021. So we believe her experience writing Impact 100 grants would be very helpful to other nonprofits. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I can't take any credit for the 2018 proposal with Table to Table. I wasn't here at the time, but certainly we were extremely excited to be selected in 2024, especially as a second-time grant recipient from Impact 100 Garden State. And as well, when I was with NorwesCap, to be selected there was a real honor and privilege.
So let's start by getting this broad perspective on how you start the grant writing process. Where do you start? What helps you when you're looking to secure funding?
Mhm. So in my 25 plus years of experience in nonprofit development and leadership, um, this is a critical question always, not just in looking at a grant opportunity like Impact 100 specifically, but any funding opportunity out there, finding the intersection between what your organization's strategic purview or plan is. What is it that you, your leadership, your board has decided are the key priorities for the future of your mission and your organization? And what is it that the funder is looking to support? So it can be tempting in the fundraising and development world to see a big number like $100,000 and say, hey, we'll figure something out that, makes them happy and that impresses them. But if it's not core to your organization's mission and strategy, and if the board and the leadership of the nonprofit hasn't already sort of identified that particular project, initiative, expansion, whatever it is, fits in with your goals and your mission, then you're going to find yourself in a difficult spot. So you start the strategic vision, the strategic plan always really has to be the North Star. Then I like to think about, you dream big, but then look at the reality of the budget, right? So it's wonderful for us, for example, with Table to Table. Our Impact 100 Garden State grant that we are currently implementing supported our expansion into Morris County using our iRescue app to mobilize volunteers to pick up donated food where it's surplus from markets and restaurants, et cetera, and bring it to a network of community partners who are feeding food insecure neighbors. That is what Table to Table's mission is. And for the 25 years we've been operating, we've operated in 4 core counties. So this represented an expansion to a 5th county. A lot of that started by this big idea of, wouldn't it be great if Table to Table was statewide? Wouldn't it be great if we were through all of New Jersey and all of this wonderful, healthy surplus food? We were there to pick it up and get it to the community partners who can then get it out to the community quickly, efficiently, while it's still fresh. But it's not realistic to go from 4 counties to 21. So looking at the reality of what it would take to expand to just 1 county, that's where the budget comes in. What are the resources that our organization needs to expand successfully into 1 county? And then how can we position that to apply for this grant? You have to be realistic. You have to really think about what it's going to take from a personnel standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint. Do you have the data and reporting systems in place? From equipment, from supplies, whatever it is, it's important to sit down as a team, with your organizations, all of the key players in your organization, and hear from them, what is it going to take for us to accomplish this successfully? And then, of course, there's the sustainability question. What, how can we position ourselves for a grant like this, which is a significant investment, but it's also a one-time investment for this particular project? How then do we carry this work forward when the period of the grant is up? And that's going to look different for every organization based on the project, based on what resources are needed and how the budget is allocated. But that conversation is absolutely critical, because I can say from years of experience and making the mistake more than once of the answer being, I'm sure by then we'll figure out how to replace that money. That's a precarious position to be in. So thinking about true sustainability is really critical.
Are you required to show that you have a sustainability idea in mind, or did you just show this $100,000 will cover all aspects of our expansion into Morris County?
Impact 100 Garden State, they want to hear about the sustainability plan. It comes up in the application, it comes up in site visits and conversations, and it comes up on an ongoing basis, even as a grantee, in our ongoing reporting and ongoing dialogues with our liaison and with the committee. And I think that's wonderful. I applaud that, because the women who are contributing to Impact 100 want to know that the investment that they're making in the organizations that receive these grants is a lasting impact. The last thing they're going to want is to hear that they paid for some wonderful new program to start, and then 2 years later, that program had to shut its doors because there was no more money. That is going to feel like a failure or a setback on the part of both the funders and the organization. And the sustainability question for any grant like this is one of the most difficult to answer, but also one of the most critical. Because if you can't answer that, is this really a road you should be going down in the first place?
Let's walk people through what the process is like, starting with the application and what grant review is like, visits, anything else that is part of the process.
Yeah, so the application process itself, there's the written narrative portion. There's writing the pieces that help Impact 100 and its members understand who you are as an organization, what it is you do, what your history has been, what impact you're making in the community already, and then diving into what is the program or project you're proposing, understanding, is this an expansion of a current program? Is this the introduction of a new program? Is this a geographical expansion? So in the two organizations that I've been fortunate to win grants from Impact 100, each of those proposals looked different in terms of what we were proposing and how it fit into what we were already doing. So I already mentioned that Table to Table was awarded a grant to expand into new geographical territory. And Norwest Cap, very different. We were looking at an existing program that had limitations on the population that we were allowed to serve, because that program, which was our Career and Life Transition Center, was a state-funded program, and the state funds had very specific criteria for what type of women we were allowed to enroll in the program. They have a specific term called displaced homemakers, and it's focused on, women who are in a situation where they need to move into the working world, and they've either been, they've been at home as primary caretaker, but now they're in a situation where, due to the death of a spouse or partner, or disability, or a divorce situation, now they need to get into the working world. But there are a lot of very specific criteria around what the state defines as a displaced homemaker. And we found that we were having to turn away a lot of women who, in a more contemporary society, were looking for help entering or re-entering the workforce, or upskilling and scaling up their earning capability for a lot of other reasons. And the fact that we had to turn them away felt very off mission. for Norwest Cap. So we applied to Impact 100 to allow us to build that program out to serve an additional population. So two very different scenarios, which required us again to really think through what resources we were going to need and how can we present this in writing in a way that was going to resonate and make sense to the members of Impact 100 who would be reading this application. Be careful, being careful of using jargon, being careful of using, industry speak, terminology that is really familiar to those of us in the organization or in the sector, but not necessarily wouldn't make sense to the general public.
So Heather, you touched a little bit about avoiding jargon. Tell me a little bit about some examples of things that you use every day at table to table and you specifically and deliberately avoided using in your application.
Absolutely. There are so many terms that we in the nonprofit sector tend to use, whether it's within our own organizations or within sort of the larger conversations that we have with colleagues. So for example, at Table to Table, we talk a lot about nutrition insecurity. And, I think that food insecurity is a fairly broadly understood term at this point, but nutrition insecurity means something a little bit different. It's a bit of a higher level of that. And that's something we understand because we live it and talk about it and work to address it every single day. But if I'm going to throw out a term like that in a proposal without the space to explain what that means, I may hit a wall with a lot of people and hit that lack of understanding, and that sort of takes them out of the story of what my proposal is. If they're going to have to research something that I've put in there, that's not a positive thing. It's on us to be able to explain these things in a way that resonates with whoever is reading this proposal. There are terms like that across all the different sectors. Housing insecurity, I think, is something similar. If you work in the housing field, you know what housing insecurity means, but that's probably not something familiar to the general public. And again, for Table to Table, even the term food rescue, which is, we identify ourselves as a food rescue organization, and there are food rescue organizations all across the country. But I've realized in my time working here, that is not necessarily a term that the general public is familiar with. So it's not sufficient for me to just say, Table to Table is New Jersey's largest food rescue, and then move on. What is food rescue? How does it work? How is it different than food banking or a food pantry? It's the onus is on me to make that clear.
You also touched on with like NORESCAP, you had an acronym for the center. Would you advise people to, maybe introduce it once, give the full name, and then refer back to it as the center, perhaps for simplicity and so that the reader can just keep going on without their brain trying to remember, what does this mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, when we're writing grant applications, every word and character does matter because there are word and character limits in pretty much every grant application you'll ever write. But defaulting to acronyms is risky because even if you've explained, clarified what that acronym is the first time, every time the reader then encounters that acronym. So in the NORESCAP example, the Career and Life Transition Center, internally, we all called it CLTC all the time. We all knew what that meant. If you worked at NORESCAP, you knew the CLTC, but that was not going to be something that was, remembered by a reader who was trying to make their way through a robust proposal. So absolutely, I would recommend steering clear of acronyms, even if you've spelled them out once, because then every time the reader encounters that, they're going to have to stop and think, what did that stand for? Let me go back, and they're again coming out of the story. So I think something like the center is a much better choice. So that's something to think about in the writing. I like to have somebody outside of my organization who is not really familiar with what we do, give it a read and tell me, does it make sense? Do you understand what we're talking about? Is there anything in here that is confusing? And have them give me feedback on, well, I think this is what you're saying. I think this is what you're going for. And then learning and adapting from that feedback. So there's the written portion of the application. There's the budget portion of the application. So again, being very clear and um, uh, honest and realistic with the resources you're going to need. Impact 100 Garden State's budget model, which is what a number of funders will use, they ask you to really outline all of the financial resources you're going to need to operate the program successfully, and then identify what portion of those will be covered by Impact 100. It's a great exercise because, again, rather than scaling the program to the number, you're really looking at the entire cost of implementing or running this program, this initiative, this expansion, whatever it is. What is it going to take across the whole board? That might include a percentage of my time, which in this case it does, a percentage of several other staff's time, as well as for us, the onboarding of a new staff person, the licensing of some technology, some supplies, some marketing costs. So outlining that full program budget and then identifying within that what portion of that and which expenses will be, are you proposing to be covered by Impact 100? So throughout that written application and then the budget proposal portion, you're really creating, both for yourself and for Impact 100, a full picture of what you want to do, what it's going to take to do it, why is it important, and what's the impact it's going to have, and how will you carry it forward when the grant period is over. So that it takes a lot of focus, but it's very rewarding focus. This happened to be the very first project I worked on as the new executive director of Table to Table. And it was a really exciting process to work with the team to vision what this expansion could look like for us, and then to boil it down to realistically, what would this look like? I think it helped us grow very quickly together as a team, learn to think and talk strategically to each other, listen and understand each other's perspectives and experiences. We have a VP of operations who's been here for our entire history, 25 years. So she had all sorts of knowledge and thoughts about how to do this that were really critical to the process, versus me coming in with a new set of eyes and a new perspective and meeting somewhere in the middle to find our best approach and our best formula for this.
And I also loved, there was a really important point that you made where you talked about having the long form proposal that certainly isn't going to meet the word and character limit, but saving that, using that as a resource, because if you go further down in the application process, you can go back and use that as a resource.
Exactly. When we worked as a team to develop our proposal and to really write out all of the things that we hoped to accomplish through our expansion, all of the reasons why it was important, all of the data that backed up the need in the first place, we saved all of that. And we had to edit it down significantly in order to fit the proposal. But I really recommend that anybody who's working on an Impact 100 proposal, write it out in as much detail as you can and hold on to that, and do a separate draft as you're boiling down to the edited version for the final proposal. Because then if you are selected for a site visit and you have the opportunity to have that face-to-face conversation with members of the committee, that longer form proposal may spark your memory of some of those things that didn't make it into the written version, but that you'd really like them to understand. And it may answer some of the questions that they have.
Yeah, and you might very well be able to demonstrate it even better through the site visit.
Exactly. Being able to have a dialogue if you are selected to go to that round, and clarify some of those points or enhance or expand on some of those points is a very, very valuable thing.
Yeah. And I can imagine too, it sounds very labor intensive, and you put a lot of time and effort into this. Is it onerous? Honestly, is it onerous? What about a small nonprofit and, they're already working 80 hours a week? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Is it time consuming? Absolutely. But I always look at opportunities like this as there's value in it, even if you don't receive the grant. And I say that because, going back to my original statement that anything you're putting out there should be part of your strategic vision and plan anyway. When we put this together and went through this process of visioning what it would be and then making it more concrete and outlining the resources, what would it take? It also helped reaffirm to us that we felt that this is very, very important that we do this. And one of the questions that we were asked in our site visit was, what if you don't get this grant? Are you going to do this anyway? My answer to that was yes, it won't happen as quickly and it won't have the oomph that we would want it to have, but we have identified this as a very key expansion for us. There is no food rescue in Morris County. There is a high need in Morris County, and there are a lot of food manufacturers, distributors, and retailers in Morris County. To us, this is an obvious next step for us, one way or another. And this is why the Impact 100 grant would allow us to do it in a significantly impactful way versus a sort of slow burn rollout, over 3, 4, 5 years, which just simply wouldn't accomplish the same level of oomph. So that's all to say, yeah, it is time consuming, but it's not just about writing the grant and spending all this time writing the grant and then hoping you win it. And if you don't, well, that was all time wasted. To me, if you're going through this process in a way that supports your organization's strategy and vision, the exercise and the work that it takes to put together a proposal this robust will be worth it no matter what. Maybe you'll take it to another funder, maybe you'll take it to a major donor, maybe you'll just incorporate it into your future plans and it may have to, wait a couple of years, but none of it should ever feel like it was a waste of time, even if you don't get the grant. And that's hard. It's hard as a development professional or a nonprofit executive to put hours and hours and hours into something and to not get the grant. It's hard, but it's always worth it in the end. I can't say I've ever worked on a big proposal that didn't in some way end up playing out to be successful, whether or not we got that particular grant.
That's really great advice. Looking forward, tell us, how does the disbursement look? What is the money helping table? Well, we know that it's helping to expand, but how quickly were you able to expand into Morris County and put the funds to use?
Yeah. One of the wonderful things about Impact 100, and I'm very grateful that they understand this as a funder, is that they disperse quarterly. And so part of the budgeting process that we go through during the application is to map out sort of estimated quarterly expenditures. So taking those budget line items and saying, okay, well, of, this salary or this marketing line, we think we're going to spend this much in quarter 1, and then it's going to ramp up to this in quarter 2, and then it's going to drop in quarter 3. And that's what Impact 100 uses to inform the disbursements. But they disperse ahead of time. And that is really, really critical, because especially for small nonprofits that might not have a very big cash margin, the difference between having to lay out the cash and then get reimbursed by the funder versus having the funder give you the cash and then you spend it down and then you report on the difference between, okay, this is how much you dispersed, this is how much we actually spent this quarter. Here's the difference, and that either gets carried over into the next quarter or additional coming in the next quarter to keep it balanced over the course of the grant. But that advance payment for expected expenditures in the coming quarter can make all the difference for a nonprofit that doesn't have a whole lot of liquid cash.
That's amazing. Is there anything else that you feel is important to share with prospective grant applications? And a little bit about what is it like working with Impact 100? It seems like it's obviously an ongoing relationship. So tell us about that.
It is. Impact 100, it's such an extraordinary organization because it's not just about funding. It's this wonderful community of women who have all made this philanthropic commitment. And the contributions that they make are not just their membership dues that goes into the funding that then goes out to organizations, but it's also their commitment of time and their interest in learning and understanding more about how nonprofits in their own communities are working and what it is they're working on. And as those members take the time to learn about that, I know in many cases, they end up becoming personally involved. They end up, volunteering. They end up becoming individual donors. They end up joining boards. And in some cases, even going to work in the nonprofit sector themselves. And and that is such a wonderful thing because I've been in nonprofit pretty much my whole career, about 25 years now. Um, it is a wonderful sector to work in large part because I like to say that in a world that can sometimes feel very difficult, we get to be the helpers and be around the helpers all the time. And that is what this Impact 100 community really represents too. So, we have our scheduled sort of quarterly reports, and I keep in touch with my liaison and I send her the reports, and then there's a review and discussion, questions if there are questions, clarification on certain points. And that's sort of the formal quarterly process. But in between, there's great communication. There's opportunities for the nonprofits to go network with the members. It's just a very warm, open community that, as a current grantee and past grantees, I know still feel very much a part of. So it's sort of just this community that grows every single year as they welcome in new members and also new grantees.
It's wonderful. I think this was a great discussion. I really hope that it's really helpful to others out there. And as a member, it's just you wish that you could give a grant to every organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But we do appreciate your time so much for sharing your knowledge with us and going into great detail about what it takes to put together a successful application.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. I really do encourage any nonprofits out there that are considering this to just try to carve out that time and that focus to look at what your vision is, drill down into what it's going to take to execute that vision, and give it a shot. I think Impact 100 has a really diverse portfolio of organizations that they've funded. And so, don't count yourself out. Don't assume that you are not big enough or that your numbers aren't big enough. That's actually another point I'd love to throw in very quickly. Sometimes in the nonprofit space, we feel compelled to put out big, big, impressive numbers when there's a big grant amount attached, that we've got to reach thousands of people. And in our case with Table to Table's proposal, we are, because our particular model of food rescue does allow us to reach tens of thousands of people. So terrific. That's great. With the Norwest Cap proposal, we proposed to reach between 75 and 80 women because over 2 years, because that work through that Career and Life Transition Center was deep work. It was 6 months to a year to 18 months of working with each woman on her journey from where she was to gainful employment, benefits, making enough to support herself and her children, et cetera. So that's not a quick touch point and on to the next. So that funding, the cost per person, if you break it down that way, seems high. But when you think about the depth of work that has to happen with each person to make the program successful, that makes total sense. So that's something I really want to encourage nonprofits to think about too. Don't think that just because your program is only going to reach 50 or 100 people that you should just count yourself out because that's not a big enough number for $100,000. Make your case. How are you going to position that funding to have the most impact? And the most impact doesn't just have to look like a big number.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Heather.
My pleasure.